In a country filled with a relaxed atmosphere, the story begins at a lively party. In the middle of the crowd, there's a woman named Amélie casually walking down the hallway. Suddenly, her gaze stops as Amélie sees a man lying on the floor. This event shocks Amélie, and she immediately panics. The story then goes back to 1 week before the incident. Amélie is known as a trainer at her own studio, while Pierce is one of the members in the class that Amélie teaches. Pierce is the only man in the class, so it's no surprise that he becomes the center of attention for the women there, including Barbara, Amélie's close friend. Barbara, seeing an opportunity, suggests that Amélie should start getting closer to Pierce. Besides the fact that Amélie is still single, Barbara also notices an interesting side of Pierce, who turns out to be a journalist with a steady income. Gossip about Pierce mentions that he's a man admired by many women. In fact, if Barbara wanted to cheat on her husband, she said Pierce would be her ideal choice. After Barbara leaves, Amélie finally starts to get to know Pierce, who has just started the class at the studio. Not only that, Amélie has also just moved to the area. After a brief introduction and discussing the studio's payment details, Pierce decides to head home. On the same day, another member of the studio, Fran, arrives late. As a result, Fran misses the last class of the day. Since it's the weekend, Amélie's studio closes for the day. Before leaving, Fran apologizes for accidentally spilling soda on Amélie's car. Amélie, being kind-hearted, forgives her without any issues. The next day, Amélie decides to install CCTV at her new home. This service is actually free for the residents of the complex, but her neighbor, Margaret, argues that the house is very safe and doesn't require a security system. Margaret has lived in the area for 10 years and has never experienced any criminal activity. After that, Amélie went to the dog daycare to drop off her pet dog, Buster. However, while Amélie was filling out the registration form, Buster suddenly ran off without her knowing. Panicking because her dog was missing, Amélie immediately called the authorities, hoping someone would find Buster. Shortly after, Pierce showed up at the studio with Buster in tow, making Amélie feel relieved and extremely happy. Pierce admitted that he found Buster in the park and recognized the dog as Amélie's, because he had often seen photos of Buster on the studio's desk. As a thank you, Amélie intended to offer Pierce a free 1-year membership. However, Pierce declined the offer and instead asked for access to private classes, because he felt uncomfortable with the attention the other moms in the neighborhood were giving him in the classes. Amélie agreed, feeling that she owed him. At that point, Amélie hadn't eaten all day. Pierce invited her to dinner, and this became an opportunity for them to get to know each other better. Amélie revealed that she had just divorced her husband. Her marriage fell apart when her husband was caught cheating, and what was worse, it turned out he had cheated multiple times. Amélie had always forgiven her husband until she eventually felt like she lost herself and didn't know who she was anymore after all the betrayal. Amélie had become very traumatized by relationships with men after her painful experience. Meanwhile, Pierce also revealed that he hadn't been in a serious relationship for a long time after breaking up with his ex-girlfriend. She was very possessive and controlling, which eventually left Pierce traumatized and feeling very uncomfortable. Shortly after that, they received a party invitation from Barbara. Since neither of them had a partner, they decided to go together as friends. Finally, the weekend came. Pierce picked Amélie up at her house, and at that moment, he was stunned by how beautiful Amélie looked, as if she were different than usual. At the party, Amélie went to grab drinks for both of them. When Amélie returned, she briefly thought there was a man wearing a mask similar to Pierce's, but it turned out to be just an illusion caused by the crowd. After greeting Barbara and her husband, Pierce invited Amélie to take a tour of the large house where the party was held. They wandered around until they found a painting that caught both of their attention. The painting made them feel connected, and without realizing it, they started talking more personally while having a warm conversation in a quiet spot. However, the atmosphere started to feel a little awkward. Fearing that they might lose control, they decided to head to the restroom for a quick break. After a while, they returned, and suddenly Amélie bumped into a woman who seemed panicked as she exited the men's restroom. That strange occurrence made Amélie feel like something was off. After that, feeling curious, Amélie hurried to the scene, worried that something serious had happened. It turned out that the man who looked like Pierce earlier was the same person who was found dead. Once the police received a report about the man's death, they immediately came to the location. After hearing Amélie and Pierce's testimonies, the police allowed them to go home, although they asked them to contact them right away if they had any additional information. After the incident, their lives returned to normal. While doing a Pilates session, Barbara asked to speak with Amélie after the class ended. However, Barbara changed her mind when she saw Amélie talking to Fran, who seemed upset after hearing that Amélie was going to give Pierce private lessons. When Pierce arrived, they started practicing together. But Pierce seemed confused by some of the Pilates moves Amélie was teaching. As people often say, when a woman and a man are together, the third element is temptation. And it was true, they almost gave in to temptation and crossed the line. Luckily, they realized they didn't have any kind of relationship. One day, Pierce was approached by his employee Dale, who wanted to discuss an article about the death of the man at Barbara's house. It turned out the man was Brian, a businessman. Dale told Pierce that the article about Brian's death had already been published without changing a single word of Pierce's draft. However, Dale decided to change the headline to attract more readers. After reviewing the article, Pierce was shocked to find that it accused Amelie of having an affair with Brian. Not only that, but the article also included a photo of Amelie just as she was leaving her Pilates studio. Pierce was taken aback and immediately called Dale. It turned out that the article had not been changed at all by Dale, which led them to believe that their company's system had been hacked by someone. Unfortunately, they couldn't remove the article because they had lost access to the company's system. Meanwhile, Amelie was hanging out at a cafe with Barbara. Barbara warned Amelie to be cautious of Fran, who turned out to be Pierce's ex-girlfriend and was once very possessive. Barbara even admitted that Fran had asked her to stay away from Pierce. Barbara had been friends with Pierce long before she dated Fran. She also believed she had seen Fran at her house the night Brian was killed, and Barbara felt that Fran had been watching Amelie at the party. Unbeknownst to them, Fran was spying on them from a distance. When it was time to leave, Fran pretended to offer Amelie a ride, claiming she had an appointment nearby. Remembering Barbara's warning, Amelie politely declined Fran's offer, which seemed to frustrate Fran even more. That afternoon, Amelie went to Pierce's house after being invited for dinner. As soon as she arrived, she was impressed by the luxury of Pierce's house, who was not only a talented journalist, but also a skilled cook. The comfortable and warm atmosphere made Amelie feel right at home. As the night got later, Amelie told Pierce that Barbara had warned her to be careful with her ex, Fran. Amelie also mentioned that she had met Fran several times, which surprised Pierce. Amelie immediately apologized for not telling him earlier. From that moment on, Amelie promised to let Pierce know if they ran into Fran again. After that, Pierce invited Amelie to go swimming. However, they almost got caught up in tension again when the fire alarm suddenly went off. The food in the oven had burned. They laughed it off and spent the rest of the night eating before Amelie finally decided to head home. When Amelie got home, she felt something was off. Buster seemed to have gotten ink on him, and it just felt weird, like something wasn't right. While feeding Buster, Amelie also noticed some leftover soda stains in his water bowl, which immediately reminded her of Fran, because Fran had once spilled soda in her car. At first, Amelie considered calling 911 for help, but after thinking for a moment, she decided against it and chose to go to sleep instead. Meanwhile, Pierce contacted security because the fire alarm at his house was still showing a warning. The operator told him that the alarm had been turned off since the night before, which shocked Pierce. What was even more shocking was when Pierce saw the CCTV footage showing Fran entering his house. Panicked, Pierce immediately called Amelie and told her to lock all the doors before he arrived. When he got home, Pierce explained what had happened and was convinced that Fran had intentionally followed him. Hearing Pierce's story, Amelie admitted that she also felt like Fran had been following her, from her presence at Barbara's party to the random encounter where Fran claimed she had just bought pizza. Sure that Fran was also following her, Pierce tried to contact the police, but unfortunately, his call went to voicemail. Seeing Amelie looking tense, Pierce suggested they go for a walk. When they got to the beach, Buster suddenly started barking because he needed to pee, so Pierce left Amelie for a moment to take Buster to the restroom. Suddenly, something shocking happened, and Amelie eventually woke up in the hospital. Soon after, the police arrived to take Amelie's statement. After trying to recall the events, Amelie finally told them that the masked girl she had encountered in the hallway at Barbara's house was Fran. Amelie recognized Fran by the earrings she was wearing. Once she was feeling better, Pierce invited Amelie to take a vacation at his parents' beach house. There, Amelie asked Pierce to dance, and they felt closer to each other. The next day, Amelie went to the beach to collect shells, but not long after, Fran showed up again. Of course, this shocked Amelie. After some vague small talk, Fran just left, which made Amelie feel immediately scared. Without thinking, she told Pierce about what had happened. Realizing the situation was getting more dangerous, Pierce suggested they go back home. When they got home, Margaret told them that a pest control officer had asked for the keys to enter the house. Amelie immediately became suspicious, and without hesitation, she went to look for Buster. At that moment, Amelie noticed a threatening message written on the mirror, which only made her panic more. They reported it to the police again. The officer handling the case finally found new evidence. A CCTV recording from the back of Barbara's house that they hadn't seen before. Unfortunately, Pierce decided he wanted to end his relationship with Amelie because he was worried about her safety. But Amelie immediately refused. She wasn't going to let Fran win and was determined to fight back, not afraid of any disturbances anymore. Thanks to the CCTV evidence, the police finally identified Fran as the suspect in Brian's murder case. But this just made Fran even crazier. She even went so far as to kidnap Margaret to carry out her plan, so she could get closer to Amelie through Margaret's house. That night, Pierce went out to search for something, and Fran, who saw him, quickly followed. In the park, Fran finally expressed her disappointment, feeling betrayed by Pierce, even though she had loved him so much. Pierce tried to convince Fran that their relationship had ended a long time ago, but Fran, who couldn't accept it, intended to kill him right there. Fran thought that if she couldn't have Pierce, no one else should be able to. Luckily, Pierce was able to fight back and tried to make Fran realize that everything she was doing was wrong. Meanwhile, Amelie went to Margaret's house to drop off a salad. But since there was no answer from Margaret, Amelie decided to just go in. Inside, she found Margaret tied up in the bathroom. Margaret quickly told Amelie to run because Fran had a sharp weapon. Unfortunately, Amelie was caught by the increasingly crazed Fran. Though Amelie put up a fight, she eventually passed out. Fortunately, Pierce arrived just in time after the police managed to capture Fran, the crazy woman. After Fran was arrested for Brian's murder, things finally calmed down. Amelie and Pierce were able to enjoy their time together peacefully, without any more disturbances from anyone.